My name is Dean Farrow, and I am 42 years old. On the night I made the last payment on my house, 11 years of a mortgage, gone, done, paid in full, my mother-in-law stood up at my own dinner table, tapped her wine glass with a fork, and told the family it was time to talk about fairly redistributing the space before dessert came out. I still had the bank confirmation email sitting unopened in my pocket. I hadn't told anyone yet. I'd planned to tell my wife privately, over coffee, the way we told each other things that mattered, quietly, just the two of us, before the world got a vote on it. I never got the chance. Faye got there first, and she didn't even know what she was interrupting. I set my fork down against the edge of my plate and lined it up neat, the way I do when I need my hands to have somewhere calm to be. Because I already knew, somewhere under the part of me that was still smiling for the table, that redistributing the space wasn't going to mean what she was about to pretend it meant, and that the next 20 minutes were going to cost me something I wasn't going to get back easily. If you've ever paid for a thing with your own two hands and then had to sit at a table while someone explained who deserved to use it more than you did, tell me where you're watching this from tonight. I have a feeling there are more of us than anyone likes to admit. I need to back up, because none of this makes sense unless you understand how this house came to hold 5 adults instead of 2. I bought the house on Crestline Avenue 9 years ago, 3 years before I met my wife Bianca, back when I was still framing houses for other men's names on the sign out front instead of my own. I'd saved for 6 years, working weekends, banking every overtime check, and I closed on it alone, in my name alone, the week I turned 33. It was small then, 2 bedrooms, a garage I couldn't park in because it was full of tools, a kitchen with linoleum I hated. Bianca used to joke that she married the house as much as she married me, because by the time we met, I'd already spent 4 years turning it into something worth keeping. We got married 6 years ago. Her parents, Faye and Roland, came up for the wedding and never fully left the conversation after that, the way some in-laws don't. A comment here about how big the yard was for just the 2 of you. A joke there about how handy it would be if family lived closer. I didn't think much of it. I liked Faye, mostly. Roland was quieter, the kind of man who let his wife do the talking and nodded along like a passenger in his own life. 2 years ago, Roland's hardware business went under, a slow bleed over 18 months. Not one dramatic collapse, the kind of failure that's almost worse because you can watch it coming and still not stop it. They lost the house they'd had for 26 years. Bianca came to me one night, not asking exactly, just laying it out the way she lays out anything that scares her, carefully, a little sideways, and said maybe, just for a few months, until they got back on their feet, her parents could stay in the finished basement. I'd built that basement myself, poured the slab, framed the walls, ran the electrical, put in a bathroom with a walk-in shower because I have a bad knee, and figured I'd want one eventually. It took me the better part of a year of weekends. I said yes to Bianca in about 4 seconds, because that's what you do when your wife is scared for her parents, and you have a spare room that took you a year to build, and somehow still feels like nothing compared to what it's for. A few months, we said. That was the phrase, a few months. That was 2 years and 3 months ago. Somewhere in there, her brother Cody moved in too, 19 months ago, when his lease ended and his girlfriend Marisol was 6 months along with their first baby, and neither of them had first, last, and deposit saved up. I said yes to that too, in about the same 4 seconds, because I am, if nothing else, consistent about that particular weakness. I want you to hold on to something, because it matters in a few minutes. The deed to that house has one name on it. Mine. Not because I was hiding anything from Bianca. We've always kept our finances honestly, and she's never once needed to be on that title to know she has a home for as long as she wants one. It simply never came up, the way a lot of things never come up in a marriage until the day they suddenly, urgently do. For 2 years, I paid the mortgage, the property taxes, the insurance, the utility bills for 5 adults, and, as of 11 months ago, a baby girl named Ruthie I love more than I know how to say out loud on a recording like this. I didn't complain about any of it, not once, not to Bianca, not to Faye, not to Roland. I told myself that's what family does. I still believe that, mostly. What I've had to relearn is that believing it doesn't mean everyone at the table believes it back. 4 days after Roland's tools finally, quietly, moved out of my garage into a storage unit he'd found, the first real sign in 2 years that things might be turning a corner for them, I made the final mortgage payment. 11 years, to the day since I signed the first one alone, in a lender's office with a cup of bad coffee and a signature that felt like the biggest thing I'd ever done. I sat in my truck in the driveway a minute before I went inside, just breathing, the way you do when something you've carried a long time finally sets itself down. I planned to tell Bianca that night. Just her. I'd bought the wine we drank on our first anniversary. I never got past setting the table. Faye had invited herself and Roland and Cody and Marisol and the baby up for what she called a little family dinner before I'd even walked in the door, and by the time I understood what was actually on the agenda, it was too late to have the quiet moment I'd planned. We were 4 courses in, Bianca's pot roast, the good plates that only came out for holidays, when Faye stood, tapped her glass, and said the thing that opened this story. "We've been talking," she said, looking around the table at everyone but me, "and we think it's time to talk about fairly redistributing the space in this house. Cody and Marisol have a baby now. They need the primary suite. The light in there is so much better for a nursery. And frankly, Dean, you and Bianca are hardly ever even in that room together with your hours. It makes more sense for you two to take the basement. You built it yourself, after all. You know it better than anyone. You won't even notice." The table went quiet in the particular way a room goes quiet when everyone already half expected something and is only now finding out how it's actually going to be said out loud. Roland studied his plate. Cody looked, for a second almost embarrassed, before he caught his mother's eye and straightened up like a man remembering his lines. Marisol didn't look at anyone at all. Bianca's hand found mine under the table, and I felt it go very still. I didn't say anything yet. I set my fork down, lined it up against the plate, and felt something in my chest go quiet and clear, because I already understood what "you won't even notice" actually meant. It meant they'd been discussing this without me for longer than tonight. It meant the basement I'd built with my own hands, so 2 people I loved would have somewhere safe to land had, somewhere in the last 2 years, quietly stopped being a gift in anyone's mind and started being a resource. I asked, as evenly as I could, how long this had been discussed. "We're not trying to ambush you," Roland said, in the careful voice of a man who knows exactly how something is going to sound and says it anyway because the alternative is worse. "We just think, practically." "A few weeks," Faye said, cutting him off, the way she'd been cutting him off for as long as I'd known either of them. "It's not a big thing, Dean. It's 1 room. You'll have the whole basement. That's more space than we had our entire marriage before this. I want to tell you the number that was sitting in my phone at that exact moment, because it matters. $211,000. That's what I'd paid, principal and interest over 11 years, to own, outright as of 4 days earlier, every square foot of the house we were sitting in, including the room they were now describing as something I simply hadn't been using enough to deserve. I told them I needed to think about it, which was true, and which Faye seemed to interpret as agreement delayed, rather than what it actually was. Over the following 2 weeks, the conversation didn't wait for my answer. Marisol started, quietly, just measuring, bringing a tape measure into the primary bedroom one Saturday, while I was at a job site, standing in the doorway with paint swatches held up against a wall that had been mine and Bianca's for 6 years. Cody mentioned, at dinner almost offhand, that a buddy of his did closets and could redo the primary storage real quick once everyone's settled. Roland started parking his truck in the spot in the driveway I'd always used. Not the guest spot, a small thing, the kind of thing you'd feel foolish complaining about on its own, which is exactly why it worked. I didn't say much. I watched. I have spent my whole working life on job sites, and if there's one thing 20 years of construction teaches you, it's how to read a project before anyone hands you the actual plans. You can tell what a room is about to become by which walls people start touching first. 11 days after the dinner, Roland knocked on my workshop door in the garage, what was left of it, now that half the shelving held Cody's things, and asked if I had a minute to look over something simple, a household agreement, he called it, that Faye had drawn up on her laptop. It named all 5 adults as having equal input on major decisions regarding the shared household, including, in a line I read 3 times to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding it, space allocation and future property decisions. I asked him, gently, whose idea the document was. He said it was just to keep things fair now that we're all really one household. I asked him if he understood that the house wasn't a shared household in any legal sense, that it had one owner and one name on 11 years of mortgage statements, and that the word "we" in that sentence was doing a tremendous amount of work it hadn't earned. He didn't have an answer for that. He just asked, quietly, if I'd at least read it over before deciding. I told him I would. I did not sign it. I photographed every page instead, on my phone, in good light, and said nothing to anyone about having done so. The pressure, once it stopped working on me directly, moved sideways, the way water finds the crack in a foundation instead of the wall itself. Faye started calling Bianca during the day, when I was on job sites and couldn't hear the tone of it. Bianca told me about the calls at night, in bed, in the dark, in the voice she uses when she's trying to sound like something isn't bothering her as much as it is. She asked me if I was really going to let my own niece grow up in a basement, Bianca said, one Tuesday, staring at the ceiling. She said Ruthie won't remember any of this, but she'll remember whether her family made room for her. Ruthie's not going in the basement, I said. Ruthie has a room. We built her one, technically, without meaning to. I know that, Bianca said. I told her that. She just kept talking like I hadn't said it. I want to be honest about something, because it matters for the rest of this. I never once doubted my wife through any of it. What I doubted some nights, lying next to her while she stared at that ceiling, was whether loving her family the way I'd tried to for 2 years was actually compatible with keeping the one thing that had let me love anyone at all. A house that was mine to offer, freely, for as long as offering it felt like generosity and not obligation. 19 days after that dinner, I sat in my truck in a job site parking lot on my lunch break and drafted a text to Bianca. I typed out that maybe it was easier to just do the room swap, keep the peace, stop the calls, stop watching my father-in-law's truck sit in my spot every morning like a small flag being planted an inch further onto my land every week. I had my thumb over send longer than a decision like that should take. I told myself I was being the bigger person. I understand now I was about 4 seconds from mistaking exhaustion for generosity, the same way I'd said yes to the basement and yes to Cody, in about 4 seconds each, 2 years running. I didn't send it. I deleted it instead, and I sat there a while longer, looking at the framed houses going up around me on a job site that wasn't mine either, in a legal sense, but that I still built the same way I built everything, like it mattered whether it stood. What stopped me, in the end, wasn't anger. It was a piece of paper I remembered signing 11 years ago and hadn't thought about since. When I built the basement, I'd pulled the permits myself, under my own contractor's license, listing myself as both the owner and the builder of record. Standard practice, the kind of paperwork you file and forget. But it meant that somewhere in the city's records, in black and white, with my signature and my license number, was a document stating plainly that I owned the structure Faye had just described as something I wouldn't even notice losing. I hadn't kept that fact in my back pocket on purpose. I'd simply forgotten it was worth remembering. The way you forget the foundation is there once the house is built on top of it and everyone's just living their lives. I didn't confront anyone at dinner. I didn't raise my voice, not then and not later. What I did instead was quieter, and it's the part of this I'm proudest of, if I'm honest. I asked Bianca, alone, on a Sunday morning while everyone else was still asleep, to sit with me at the kitchen table. The real conversation I'd meant to have the night I made that last payment, 3 weeks late, and considerably more complicated than I'd planned it. I told her I loved her family, and I loved her more, and that I needed to know, honestly, whether she wanted this house to keep being a place her parents lived in, or a place her parents had begun, slowly, to believe they owned a piece of. Bianca didn't answer right away. When she did, she said the thing I'd needed to hear for 2 years and hadn't known how to ask for directly. "I want it to be our house again," she said. "I love my mom. I don't love who I've been around her the last 2 years." That Tuesday, on my lunch break, I drove to see a real estate attorney a client had recommended years earlier, a calm, unhurried woman named Ms. Halloran, who read the household agreement Roland had shown me, read the permits I'd pulled up on my phone, and told me, plainly, what I already suspected but needed to hear from someone whose job it was to be right about it. Occupants without a lease, family or not, could be given formal written notice to vacate, 30 days under our state's law, delivered properly, with no eviction required because no tenancy had ever legally existed in the first place. She helped me draft it that same afternoon. I didn't feel triumphant sitting in her office. I felt, mostly, tired and a little sad, the way you feel finishing a job you wish had never needed doing. I served the notice on a Sunday, at the kitchen table, at what Faye had scheduled as a follow-up planning dinner, to finalize the room swap. She'd even brought paint swatches of her own, a soft gray she thought would suit the basement. I let her get most of the way through her plan before I set two things on the table, side by side: the notice, dated and signed, and a copy of the permit with my name on it as the recorded owner and builder of the space she'd just spent 10 minutes redecorating in her head. "I'm not doing the room swap," I said, "and I need you all to have a place lined up within 30 days. The silence that followed was not the polite kind. Faye's face did something I'd never seen it do in 6 years. Went pale, then tight, then, for just a second, frightened, before it settled into something closer to fury. "You're throwing your wife's family out," she said. "You over a bedroom." "I'm not throwing anyone out," I said. "I'm asking for my house back. There's a difference, even if it doesn't feel like one from where you're sitting." Roland didn't say much. He looked, mostly, like a man who'd known this was coming longer than he'd let on, and hadn't found the nerve to say so out loud to his wife. Cody started to say something about Ruthie needing stability, and I told him, as gently as I knew how, that Ruthie was welcome in this house for the rest of her life, as a guest whenever she wanted, the same as she'd always been, that this was never about her. Bianca, who I'd told the night before what I planned to do, and who'd told me she was ready to say her piece too, put her hand flat on the table, not loud, not dramatic, just steady. "I'm with Dean," she said, looking at her mother. "I should have said that 3 weeks ago. I'm saying it now." Faye looked at her daughter like the floor had actually moved. I don't think, in 26 years of raising her, it had ever seriously occurred to Faye that Bianca might choose anyone over her, including her own husband. I watched that realization cross her face, the way you watch weather change on a mountain. Slow, then all at once. They didn't leave that night, and I never expected them to. It took them 26 days, and one paycheck of mine helping Roland with a deposit I didn't have to offer, and offered anyway, because generosity, it turns out, and being taken for granted, are not actually opposites. They just require you to be the one deciding, instead of the one being decided for. Cody, Marisol, and Ruthie found a 2-bedroom 11 minutes away. Faye and Roland took a small apartment closer to Roland's new job, a floor manager position at a hardware supply company that, in a detail I still find almost funny, is owned by a man I did framing work for 9 years ago. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been in over 2 years. I remember standing in the primary bedroom the first night. It was just Bianca and me again, and neither of us saying much, just standing there in a room that had never actually stopped being ours, no matter how many measuring tapes had been held up against its walls. Roland calls me now and then, awkwardly, usually about something small, a tool he needs to borrow, a question about a leaking faucet at the new apartment. I always help. I don't know if that makes us square. I don't think it needs to. Faye and Bianca talk on the phone most Sundays, shorter conversations than they used to have, a little more careful on both ends, still finding the new shape of it. I'm at peace not knowing exactly how that finishes. Some things you let finish slowly, on their own schedule, instead of forcing a clean ending, because a clean ending would be more satisfying to tell. I used to think that being generous meant never asking anyone to leave, no matter what it cost me to let them stay. I don't believe that anymore, and if you take one thing from tonight, let it be this. A house you paid for with your own two hands is not owed to anyone simply because they got comfortable in it. Your patience is not a deed changing hands, and loving your family was never supposed to mean slowly disappearing from the floor plan of your own life until someone has to remind you which rooms are still yours. I didn't put anyone out of a family. I just stopped agreeing to be redrawn out of my own house one comment at a time. What they build next, they'll build themselves. The same way I built that basement. One weekend, one wall, one decision at a time, until it was something worth having an opinion about. Comment below. If your own family started deciding, quietly, which parts of your life belong to them too, would you have set the fork down the way I did? Or would you have kept passing the piece around the table a while longer? I'd genuinely like to know where you land. However this landed for you tonight, you're allowed to sit with it. This story is fiction, written for reflection and entertainment, though I suspect a few of you just recognize somebody's voice in phase. If it leaves you with anything, let it be this. A door held open out of love can stay open for years. It was never supposed to come off its hinges.